But they bring me stuff, which I consider tribute in exchange for hauling away my used up clothing. And so they can survive as long as they're willing to exist that way. Now, in terms of skills, I have a particular collection of skills that I'll bring for this embark that I don't necessarily recommend for every embark, but it's a good basic set for the type of embark we'll be doing. Now, when you pick out what you bring with you, it's important to recognize that raw materials are cheaper than finished goods. So it's cheaper to bring thread and weave the thread into cloth and make the cloth into a bag than it is to bring the bag from the start. And in fact, there's a few shortcuts that will allow you to even save a few more embark points, which I'll go into when we get to that point. But in order to take advantage of that, that means that I have to have certain sets of skills that my dwarves are going to be expected to be able to do. So, for example, I tend to have more miners right off the start than a lot of other embarks. And I do that because one of the first things I'm going to do is dig in, get myself a hobbit hole, and start moving my stuff underground. We're going to go early on for defense in our fort. The general hierarchy of needs for your dwarves is going to be food first, security second, industry third, wealth last. Wealth and happiness last. Um, if your dwarves aren't secure, they're going to be unhappy pretty quick anyway because they're going to get slaughtered. If your dwarves are starving, they're going to be unhappy pretty quick anyway because they can't find enough rats to eat when they're starving to death. We're going to move up the hierarchy, as it were, as we move through the various stages of our fort. But the initial stage is going to be securing a place to exist and securing a source of food. So to that end, I bring 4 miners at skill 5. Now, mining is one of those skills where the increase in skill doesn't make your dwarf more effective. He doesn't get more stone out of the earth if you have better miners. What he does do is work more quickly. So a more skilled miner will cut through rock faster and cut through soil faster. A lower level or unskilled miner will take longer to perform that task. They'll both end up with the same amount of raw materials, but one of them will do it a whole lot faster and move on to the second job, while the other one is still tinkering around trying to figure out how the pick works. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Don't worry. So I bring 4 miners. So we're gonna excavate a fairly sizable area fairly quickly. This is a large number of miners. If you're embarking in more hostile terrain, you might want to consider dropping a couple of the miners and making them into militia dwarves, hammer dwarves or axe dwarves, and making yourself some weapons early so that you can start a militia right off the bat. If you were embarking in evil terrain, I would strongly recommend bringing some sort of soldiers with you because you're likely to be attacked by zombie badgers right off the bat and immediately be eliminated. Now, the last 3 are craft dwarves. Carpenter for beds and bins, also barrels, but not so much, and a few other miscellaneous wood objects, but mostly beds and bins. And a mason for stone furniture. Stone furniture is what we're going to get into right away because it's cheap and readily available, and a good skilled mason can make high quality stone furniture. It may not be the most valuable, but it's perfectly functional, and the high quality can help keep your dwarves happy. The last guy is going to be a weaponsmith and a grower, a farmer. And we're doing the weaponsmith for a reason. When we embark, we're not going to have any tools. I'm going to embark with a bare minimum of items. We'll have to make all of our picks, axes, and so forth on site. And I do that to extend the amount of embark points I get. I won't really min-max it, but we will kind of stretch it a little bit in a couple of places. And one of those is we'll bring raw ore and we'll make bars of metal, and then we'll make weapons from that, rather than bringing the metal, or rather than bringing the metal itself, or bringing the weapons themselves. Folks are asking me, yeah, the legendary barely touches the wall. That's about right. Danger rooms do work with the new combat, just like they always have. That hasn't changed. I will not be using a danger room on stream. 24 hours or 24 hours of footage tomorrow, guys. We'll have plenty of time to train a military, and I'll show you how to do it the real way. It's not as bad as it used to be. The changes to the military allow you to have a great deal of fine control over your military, and you really can get them training efficiently and effectively, and I will show you how along the way. Yep, I always bring ore instead of the picks. So I make a weaponsmith so that I get good quality picks and I get them reasonably quickly, but I also need a farmer because I'm going to need somebody to grow. Now, what this particular arrangement of skills gets me is that every dwarf has what's called a mutable skill right off the bat. I have 4 of them with mining, 1 with carpenter, 1 with mason, and 1 with weaponsmith. Grower is not a mutable skill. Now, what mutable means is every so often a dwarf's going to go into a funk, and he's going to go make himself an artifact. And this can be a really awesome thing. It's worth a lot of dwarf bucks, and artifact weapons and armor are more effective than their standard counterparts. Uh, Artifact mechanisms can be built into weapon traps, and they'll make your dwarves much happier because the artifact is so valuable. Uh, Artifacts are a good thing to have, and mutable skills are the key. Not every skill is mutable. For example, skills that don't produce what you would consider a craft object probably aren't mutable. Metalsmith is, armorsmith is, bowyer is, weaponsmith is, but woodburners just make fuel, and uh, gem cutters just make gems, and glazers just glaze pots. And so there's limited excuse me, not gem cutter, that's actually a mutable, gem setter. There's a limited feature, if you will, to what can and can't get a mood. Each dwarf will only make an artifact in the skill he's most proficient in that's mutable. So in the case of our farmer, that's weaponsmith. In the case of our mason, it's masonry and carpentry and mining and so forth. Even if they train in another mutable skill, if, for example, I have my mason also do a little bit of carpentry on the side, as long as mason remains his highest skill, that'll be what he makes his artifact out of. I'm not sure I'm following you, Purple. In what scenario are you questioning there? Artifacts are random. They'll just occur periodically. So periodically the game will say, oh, time to create an artifact, and it'll pick a dwarf at random, and that dwarf will use his highest mutable skill, whatever that might be. Basically, they're craft skills. The wiki has an article on mutable skills that will tell you exactly what they are. And when we go into creating our custom professions, you'll see me specialize mutable professions into specialists. And things that aren't mutable, I'll generally do en masse in parallel using unskilled labor. Oh, military bug. I haven't seen a military bug where they won't. Yeah, there's a bit of a lag between chat and my voice, unfortunately. So when I notice you guys talking, then I have to try and figure it out. And then there's 60 seconds while you guys have to hear what I'm saying. It's Twitch, the way it's set up, I'm afraid. Yeah, I just wish they allowed you to turn it off. I really don't need the delay in this case. It's actually harmful. But I'll try to do my best. Just keep in mind, guys, if you ask me a question and it takes me a few seconds to answer, there's a delay between you and I. Okay, so we've picked out our skills. Everybody's got a mutable skill. Everybody has a function to start off with right in our fortress. Now we need to talk about what we bring. You'll notice on the right is a list of animals, and what you can't see on the left is that's where the list of items that we'll bring is. We'll start with the animals. So I'll move over here to the right, and we'll go down, and I'll bring some dogs, about 5 of those, and I'll bring 1 male. Now, the reason it's 1 male and 5 females is because you need only 1 guy to get the job done, and 5 females will allow you to increase your population faster. If you reverse the ratio, 1 female and 5 males, your population will increase very slowly because you only have 1 female to give birth at a time. So when we bring animals, I will tend to bring multiple females and single males. The exception would be cats, which we will strictly control the population of, and the rest are varying by their cost. Now you'll notice some of these animals are more expensive than others. That's typically because they provide more resources. They're larger, for example, so there's more meat, more bone. Uh, they may be more valuable in terms of the value of the resources they produce. Now, the reason I bring these animals is particular. I bring dogs for not just meat and leather and bone, but also because dogs can be trained to defend my fortress from invaders. I bring cats to eliminate vermin, but I only bring a couple because I keep them under absolutely strict population control at all times. We will brutalize kittens on a regular basis in order to keep our population numbers low, and cats. I do not want to have a large number. I bring some sheep because sheep are like the ideal grazing animal. In addition to leather and bone and meat that you can get from your dogs or your cats, sheep also produce milk and wool. So they provide all of the animal products you could conceivably want to get from an animal for the variety of industries that you can produce. And then lastly is birds. In the past, I've used turkeys because turkeys are the largest animals, largest birds, and they produce an enormous clutch of eggs. Typically, however, I will bring blue peahens, blue peacocks, because the blue peahens and peacocks mature more quickly, so they will actually reach full size at a year rather than waiting for 2 years for them to reach full size. So we will start to expand our bird population a little sooner, and although they don't lay as many eggs, we'll actually end up with more birds faster, I believe, this way than we will with the larger clutches. Especially if you're talking about butchering them at maximum size. Having single year maturity means they mature to full size almost immediately, whereas 2 years for the turkeys means they grow up at year one and then you have to wait a year to butcher them in order to get the full quantity of their material. Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. Someone was asking about the other wonderful feature in Dwarf Fortress's new version. Thank you for thank you for reminding me. I totally spaced it. That would have been fun. So, the current version has added a new skill called Discipline, and every one of your starting 7 should have at least Novice Discipline. And the reason is really simple. Discipline is the skill not to get terrified by dead bodies and ugly things, basically. As silly as that sounds, the new version of Dwarf Fortress, if you tell dwarves to bury a corpse, a lot of times if they don't have any discipline skill, they panic and freak out and run away. And they'll panic and freak out and run away repeatedly. So having some guys with discipline is a good thing to be able to get your dwarves buried, deal with those sorts of unpleasant things like undead that might otherwise frighten your dwarves. Having your starting 7 have discipline means you're not dependent on having a migrant that has it, and you have it off the bat instead of having to train it. Now, I've been told that discipline skill will go up over time as your dwarves train in militia squads, so you can groom them for discipline, but it's probably not the fastest process, and you do have to groom them for it, which means that taking a single level in it will give you the skill to start and give you the ability to hopefully bury all your corpses rather than getting terrified by them instead. All right, let's back to the items. So I've given myself some basic animals. I've got my skills set. Let's go ahead and add items. And items, I hit new, and then I get to pick out the type of item I want to add. And so we're going to add first the items we're going to bring for our smithing. If at all possible, bring an iron anvil. It's cheaper than a steel one. You'll have to take steel if your civilization doesn't have access to iron. Cassiterite is an ore of tin, malachite is an ore of copper, and bituminous coal is broken down into fuel, coke. By bringing both copper and tin ores, we will be able to make bronze right off the start. So this will give us the ability to make bronze weapons right at the beginning, rather than having to take copper items, for example. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way, I mentioned it earlier, but I didn't really go into details. Let's talk digging implements, picks. The cheapest pick you can bring normally is a copper pick, which costs 44 points. Okay? An iron pick is 220 and is basically unaffordable if you're using the standard number of points because you're going to run out of points really quick if you're bringing iron stuff. So, 44 points to bring copper picks, and I believe the default embark profile gives you 2 of them. So that's 88 points for 2 picks. We're going to bring 10 units of cassiterite, 10 units of malachite, and 10 units of coal. Okay? And that's 60, 60, and 30. Now I can hear in the background, oh my god, you're bringing way more, that's not fair. But here's the thing. I could back this down. I could back it down to, say, 2. And I can back this down to 2. And I can back this down to 2. And 12 plus 6, 30 embark points. The difference is each one of these things will allow me to make 8 bars of metal. So, for example, when I combine my ore of cassiterite and I combine my ore of malachite, I'm going to get 8 bars of bronze back, and it's going to use 1 bar, maybe 2 bars to make a pick. I think it's just 1. So I'll end up with 8 picks from the first combination. And I've got 2 combinations, so that's 16 picks worth of material. Likewise, the coal will break down into coke and can be used to fuel those reactions. So for an incredibly cheaper number of embark points, relatively speaking, I'm getting a vast quantity of material that I can use to build weapons and armor from the start. Again, if you're embarking in evil terrain, you probably want to bring the real things and not try to make them on site, because the zombie badgers are not going to wait for you to get smelters and furnaces set up, and not going to wait for you to smelt your ore and make your metal and forge your picks and armor your dwarves. No, 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 no. If you're embarking in evil terrain, this is probably not going to work. But for us, just fine. Savage is just A-okay, but evil is a whole nother ballgame. A civilization can have access to steel without iron by trading for the materials, as it turns out. You could theoretically trade for the iron or trade for the pig iron, and there you go. Yeah, basically, embark points controls the amount of resources you can get, but it also controls the type by virtue of finished goods being very expensive. So if I give myself 10,000 embark points, or whatever the maximum is, I could theoretically bring 7 dwarves with 7 suits of armor and 7 weapons and 7 shields and a host of dogs and sheep and cows and pigs and raise a farm from the start with 7 warriors who've just quit the army and have decided to go into business as farmers. That's correct, I will, and I hadn't got there yet. Patience, patience. So this is the basics that I would need to actually produce, but the downside of this is that I need at least 1 unit of fuel to prime the pump, as it were. I need a unit of fuel to break down the coal into fuel. So I have 2 choices to get that fuel. I can burn wood that I can bring with me or find on site, but then I have to build a wood furnace and I have to burn the wood, and then that just gets me the unit of fuel that I then can start breaking down the coke, which means the entire process takes even longer. So, although it's a little more costly and it is a finished good, it's kind of an exception. I typically will bring 1 unit of coke or 1 unit of charcoal if coke is not available. They are the same thing. They are functionally equivalent. Both are fuels. You'll notice that they show up in the same category. Charcoal and coke are equivalent. The others are different. Don't confuse them. But we can bring 1 unit of coke, and that gets us the fuel necessary to prime our pump. So immediately we can take the coke and make more coke from the coal, and then immediately take that coke and start making bronze, and then take the coke that's left over and make picks, and we can be making picks very, very quickly, very early on. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't cover what I haven't really talked about or haven't really done. So, fruit harvesting is not something I've worked with. I'm not going to be qualified to talk about it until I've had a chance to play it. And version 40.14 isn't out yet, so I feel quite safe in saying I'm going to use version 40.13, and we're just going to have to deal with it. When Toady releases 40.14, I suspect you're going to have a few more bugs. All right, so well, don't save your comments. If you think I'm forgetting something, by all means, speak up. But don't laugh when I tease you. Okay, so that takes care of our anvil, which you need for smithing, and all of our ores and our fuel. So that's our metals taken care of. Now we do need to take some stone, because without some stone, you'll have a hard time making the workshops in which you'll do your smithing, because it needs to be something that's fire safe. So we'll bring a few sandstone blocks with us. It turns out that our stone availability may not be. Let's see if they had other types. I didn't see any though. Oh, good. They do have plenty of types. Good, good, good. Okay, never mind. You'll notice that bringing certain types of stone, like hematite, is much more expensive. That's because hematite is an iron ore. So the game knows if you're bringing hematite, you're going to smelt iron out of it. and it's not going to let you get away with doing that at the standard number of embark points. 3-point stones are basic stones. 6-point stones are flux. Obsidian is worth 9 points. It's not the only one, but it's the only stone. Tetrahedrite is actually an ore. Ores are worth progressively more as the value of their materials goes up. So sphalerite is zinc, and then tetrahedrite is copper and silver, and galena is lead and silver. Magnetite is iron, and so forth. Gold nuggets produce gold, so obviously that's even more expensive still. I take peahens because peahens... Okay, so this deserves a more detailed discussion. Why peahens? And I kind of glossed over it. There's a sentence you never thought you'd type into Google. Keeping in mind this has not been updated for version 40 and might be slightly erroneous, but I doubt it. This is a list of what each bird gives you when it's butchered, or how many eggs it produces and how long it takes to grow up. So right off the bat, we see that there's 3 birds that grew up in 1 year, so they grow up faster. Okay, they are adults quicker. They start reproducing earlier, and you can butcher them immediately and get the full yield of whatever material they have. Okay. However, guinea fowl are so small they produce no edible components whatsoever. So they're out, because if I want to butcher the damn things, I'd like to be able to eat when I'm done. Geese look pretty good, except that when you look at the eggs comparison, they actually produce fewer eggs minimum than the blue peafowl. And they produce fewer overall, on average. Egg size is completely irrelevant in the current version. Max age is how old a bird can get if you actually let it. So peafowl can live longer, and will always live longer than the lowest case on geese. And they produce the equivalent amount of edible material and bones between the two. So peafowl are the best in the 1 year category. Okay, guinea fowl have no materials. They're bad. Don't bring them. They're basically a skull, and I don't even know if you get that. Okay, now on the 2 year birds, okay, chickens produce far fewer eggs than the other types, so lower average, lower minimum. Ducks produce less than turkeys. Okay, so right now turkeys have the lead already. On top of that, the edible quantity, ducks are like guinea fowl, no edible stuff, so ducks are out too. And chickens produce less than turkeys, which makes turkeys the best 2 year bird. And that just brings you back to, do you want blue peafowl or do you want turkeys? The difference is primarily in egg production. Blue peafowl are slightly less productive in terms of the amount of eggs that they'll lay. However, overall edibility, not counting eggs, is about the same between the 2 birds, and blue peafowl grow up twice as fast. They reach full size twice as fast. So you can be butchering blue peafowl once a year at full growth, instead of having to keep them around to grow up for an extra year to get full size. And the addition of the additional year only gets you a couple more meat, so you're not really gaining a whole lot. And this kind of depth is throughout the game. Domestic animals. So there's only a handful of the domestic animals I'd actually take with me. Rabbits don't have anything edible. Cavies, same thing, so they're out. I don't take them because you can't get anything out of them. Most of the rest are suitable only for meat, and they have progressively larger grazing requirements. This grazer category over here deserves a special mention. The larger this number is, the easier it is to keep them alive, the less space they require. So rabbits require almost no space to be able to graze. Water buffalo, on the other hand, have huge amounts of space that they require per animal, and they will eat their grass out of house and home. As the wiki mentions, it can be difficult or impossible to keep a tame water buffalo alive simply because you can't keep it enough grass in it. It's probably a bug, this being set too low. Likewise, elephants starve in the current version because the grazer tag is set too low. They basically, even if they eat and even if they always move to a spot with grass, they still can't eat fast enough to keep themselves alive. Uh, they don't starve in World Gen because they don't require food then, but you can't tame them and expect to get anything out of them because they starve unless you modify that tag. Now, remember, we were talking about the raw files earlier, okay? We were talking about the raw files earlier. Does it, Wrath? Have they fixed? Did it fix elephants? That's the question I have. Because in earlier versions, it was pointless to tame an elephant because they will starve to death in version 34. You can't keep them alive. It's an easy fix. You can modify the raws, change the grazer number, and away you go. If you remove the grazer tag, they don't require any food at all. So you could make your rabbits, for example, not require any grazing. You could make your elephants not require any grazing. Later on, theoretically, Toady is going to allow dwarves to process plants maybe into animal feed, at which point, you won't have to worry about grazing as much as you do in the current version. Oh, pandas. Someone asked about pandas. Pandas only eat bamboo. No bamboo, no pandas. Yeah, that's a bad one. It's a nasty gotcha that you won't expect because you'll be expected to be able to feed your pandas and they eat bamboo, I'm pretty sure. Did he put a bug? Oh, okay, good. Somebody says he put a bug fix in version 40.13 for elephants and giraffes. So it may be possible now, finally, again, to tame your elephants. We will discuss taming animals. If we're lucky, we'll be able to capture a breeding pair of one or more types somewhere along the way, and we'll discuss how you tame them. Yeah, elephants eating tree fruit would be awesome. Elephants and other animals being allowed to graze from harvested fruit, that would be fantastic. Ditto if you could do it off vegetables, but the current version doesn't allow you to feed them manually. Mules are out from. So let's back up a step. Right off the bat, I exclude the animals that don't give me any food. They're out. Of the next set, alpaca, goat, and sheep all have wool. Okay, but sheep and goats require less grazing space than alpaca, and they produce a little less bones and a little less edible stuff, but they're a whole lot cheaper on embark points overall too. The difference, I'm sorry, goats don't produce wool. So goats are out because they don't produce the wool I want. So that leaves alpaca and sheep. And alpaca are twice as expensive, more or less. So we're down to sheep. Pigs get a special mention here. They are not grazers, but they can produce milk and leather. So you can raise pigs in a stone cage. Yeah, I can't speak to giant pandas. I don't know how much more food they require. I've never bothered to try and tame them. I don't know why you would bother, frankly. The only purpose I can see for a panda in Dwarf Fortress is as meat. Pigs get a special mention because aside from wool, they produce all other components of animals, including milk, and they require no grazing. So you can stash them anywhere basically. They are, however, a little more expensive, and they are equivalently expensive to sheep. So if you can get a pasture up, skip the pigs and go for the sheep. The larger grazers, the 100 and 151 point animals, require more grazing space, and although they do produce more food, it's not such a wild increase per animal that it really matters. Some of them are milkable. Llamas, for example, are also shearable, but they're more expensive. They have tighter grazing requirements. It's just more hassle. So sheep are easy and cheap. Sheep it is. Don't bother with rabbits or cavies at all unless you just want animals you can toss into the caves to explore for you, or sacrifices for the volcano, maybe. They don't live very long. They don't have any purpose whatsoever. You get nothing edible from them. No bones, no nothing. You can get skulls, I guess. I think technically that's it. All right, so that covers animals. Back to items. We brought some stone. Even though this is a wooded area, I will bring a little bit of wood with me, so that means some logs. We'll bring some tower nut logs or some paradise nut wood logs. Why not? We'll bring a few of those. That's just to get my carpenter off to an early start before we start cutting trees. We'll bring some fish, and I will bring one of each type of fish to start, and then we will increase the amount of one. And the reason we do this is to capitalize on barrels, and I'll explain. So we'll bring 40 lungfish, 40 male lungfish, mind you, and one female lungfish, and one cave lobster, male and female one. These aren't breeding, they're dead animals, okay? They're just meat. But bringing them will require a barrel for each type. So there's a barrel for cave lobster, and a barrel for cave fish, and a barrel for lungfish, and as your quantity increases, it will require another barrel. So 40 is a cutoff, if I remember right, it's like 10 units per barrel or 5 units per barrel, and 41 will require an additional barrel. So this will give you your food in barrels, and you'll bring an extra couple of barrels with only 1 unit of food in it, so mostly empty barrels. As that food gets eaten, those empty barrels become available for reuse, and so this is an easy way to bring cheap barrels. Barrels by themselves are like 10 embark points, but 1 unit of food is only 2. So you can get a free barrel, basically, because you already get the food, and you get the barrel for free. This allows us to stretch our embark points a little further. If you're a real min-maxer and you really want to go all out, then instead of bringing 41 of one type, you bring 41 different types of meat and fish. And that will get you all of those barrels that you really, really want. I want a few extra barrels. We'll produce most of them on site. Okay, give me a sec, guys. I got to step AFK for just a moment here. Two and a half hours of straight lecturing and my voice hasn't given out yet. Good sign. Alright, so that gets us food. So now our dwarves are going to be fed to start. And that's not enough food to actually run a fortress on, but it's enough to get one started. We'll also need to bring drinks. Dwarves who don't have alcohol actually slow down drastically. So not having alcohol is bad right off the bat. So we'll bring one of each type of drink, and I will increase, so let's use dwarven rum, up to about 60. I'll do 61, in fact, so we get the extra barrel. And just as with the food, it's the same principle. There'll be a barrel with 1 unit of wine, a barrel with 1 unit of ale, and as that ale gets drunk and that wine gets drunk, we'll have a barrel for free. So that gets us access to some barrels earlier on quickly. Okay, so now we've got our food and drinks, and let's see, what else do we need here? Seeds. No seeds, you can't plant crops. So I bring one of each type of seed, and I'll increase some of them, and I'll explain why here in a moment. Go ahead and get them all added. Now each of these seeds produces a different type of plant, and each plant has its own uses. Plump helmets are a staple crop. You will grow lots and lots of plump helmets normally. Plump helmets, in fact, are probably the staple crop. If I had to pick one plant that was grown in every fortress ever, this would probably be it. Unless you're intentionally avoiding plants, you're probably growing plump helmets. They mature more quickly than other plants, and they can be eaten raw. They can also be brewed into alcohol, which you will need. And since they mature more quickly, you can actually produce more of them per season than other crops. Pigtails are not edible, but can be processed into booze, and they are a source of cloth. They can be woven, basically broken down into thread and then woven into cloth and used to clothe your dwarves. Pigtails are important to me as well. Cave wheat is a little less important to me. It can be ground into flour or brewed into booze, but it's not edible raw. Sweet pods can be ground into or brewed into booze, ground into sugar, and uh, processed into syrup. Rock nuts are edible raw, but can't be brewed, and produce quarry bushes, which are among the most valuable types of food because of their quantities. And I'll explain the magnification of stacks later on in the stream. But basically what you need to know is that I'll use these types of crops primarily for feeding my dwarves. Dimple cups are for dye. I bring one just to have one, but I don't need more than one seed to start. Dye is a completely optional thing that you can do to increase wealth, and early on wealth is going to be completely unimportant. The answer is because seeds are stored in bags, and all of your seeds are stored in a bag, basically. So, yeah. Um, if I had 200 seeds, they'd still be in one bag. Plump helmet seeds, they'd still be in one bag. So, there's no point in increasing the seeds beyond what I actually need. I do it with food, I do it with drink. That's about it. Now, there's one other place I do kind of get a free container, and that's in the sand category. Doesn't matter what kind of sand you bring, red, black, white, it's all the same. Each unit of sand comes with its own bag, so this is 20 free bags. A bag costs like 10 or 15 points. A unit of sand costs 1. So you can take the sand and make glass with it and have the free bag, or you can take the sand and dump the sand out and have the free bag. But that's 20 bags, basically, right there. And I get the sand for free. There is a cap of seeds. It's set in the init file. Someone was asking about the cap. By default, it's 200. You can turn it up a little bit if you like, but I don't know that I'd go too much higher than maybe 300. There's really not a point in having 1,000 plump helmet seeds floating around in your fortress. The old ones go bad, and they're not guaranteed to plant the best ones. So having a few extras good for avoiding a problem where the caravan shows up with a few bags of plump helmet seeds, and the game removes a few that it shouldn't. Okay, so let's see here. That's our sand. We've brought stone. We brought logs. We've got fuel and stone and thread. I take a few units of thread and I go with a thread I can't get access to easily, specifically for moods. So let's talk about moods. Remember, your dwarves are going to create an artifact, and when they do, they're going to want a particular type of item sometimes. In the case of cloth, for example, they might want silk, or they might want animal cloth, or they might want plant cloth, and there's 3 different types that you have to be able to provide for your dwarves to be able to successfully complete their mood. Failing a mood will kill your dwarf, so it's important that you have the ability to provide those things when they're needed. So, in my case, I bring silk for a reason. I have sheep for animal cloth, I have pigtail seeds to eventually produce plant cloth, and I have uh, a couple of silk threads to start just so I have access to silk. Now that gets me access to all the different types of thread, all the different types of cloth. We'll have access to stone, we'll have access to metal, we'll have access to wood. So those types of materials aren't such a big deal. But cloth initially on an early mood is potentially a little harder to come by. Gems we could just excavate. Glass we could build a glass forge. Uh, silk thread is hard. That basically means you have to punch a hole in the caverns and build a loom and hope somebody goes down there in the caves and successfully returns with thread or returns with a web that they can process into silk thread. And you may have to do it more than once. And so you're going to have to be forced to expose your fortress to dangers you may not be ready for. You're going to be forced to send your dwarves out into potentially hostile territory, and just for a couple of embark points you could have spent at the beginning. So silk thread and sheep and pigtails, and you're covered. And that pretty well, I think, covers just about everything. Let me look here. That pretty much is the works. I don't really need anything else. So this is like a bare minimum. You'll notice I've still got embark points left over. I can take more stuff. I could take more logs, for example, or I could take more stone or whatever I need for my particular fortress. I could take more raw materials to produce more stuff. Sun sickness is a thing, yes. And yes, you can have an enclosed web gathering area. What you will not have on your first mood is a safe way to harvest webs. There is no real way to do it in the first season or two if you happen to get a very early mood. So you'll run into a problem where uh, your dwarves, for example, will have to go down into caves, and you may or may not have a problem. You could get away with it. You might not. Preparing in advance means that we will get away with it. Okay, so I think we've got everything we actually need as such. You'll notice I've got about 90 embark points left over that I could spend however I like. If I'm sitting at this point, let me look back through what we've got here. This is about what I would take as a bare minimum. If I were embarking in a desert, for example, or someplace where some of these resources might not be more readily available, I might conceivably take, for example, more logs if I'm embarking in a desert that didn't have coal, so that I had an early source of fuel and materials. If I were embarking in a glacier, for example, I might bring extra food and drink because producing it early might be harder than normal. If I were going to embark in evil terrain, I might consider bringing weapons and armor instead of raw materials because I might be under attack early. You really will need to consider when you're embarking exactly what sort of terrain you're going to have to embark in and what you might need to deal with that. Overall, though, this setup will work in most terrains in Dwarf Fortress right out of the gate. Um, if you're going to embark in someplace with less trees, bring more logs, but otherwise, this is probably a reasonably good general setup. And with 90 more points, you can customize it a little bit to your taste. So before I go about spending those 90 points, I'm going to open the floor up to all the more advanced players out there who are watching us and talking in thread and on chat. Anybody have a suggestion for how they would spend their last 90 embark points if they had this setup? I'll just kind of open the floor and see if anybody else has any suggestions. I started at 6:30, but keep in mind this isn't actually for my extra live stream. That'll start tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. We're at 2.5 hours, a little more than. Okay, so why would you bring one of each type of milk? For barrels so that you make cheese? Okay, that's not a bad idea. I've done that in the past. Extra barrels aren't as useful in the new version as they used to be in the old version because of the prevalence of wood. Cutting even a single tree now probably yields, 10, 12 logs, sometimes more. Um, no, they don't drink milk. Milk is only usable as a cheese component. It doesn't matter because you can take the milk and immediately convert it to cheese, and so it's usable as food even if they're not drinking it. It's just one of those things to be aware of. Plaster and soap are not necessarily bad things to bring. Plaster will allow you to set your dwarves' broken bones early on, and you may not have plaster on site. We probably don't. So that's probably the one thing we're missing. Yep, if you bring odd quantities of food, for example, you'll get extra barrels, which is why we have 41 lungfish and an extra one, and then one each of the lobsters and one each of the fish. The truth of the matter is if you're really going to min-max it, then you're really not creating 11 of something, you're bringing one of something. No, I think we'll be all right without the copper axe. If I were going to embark in a more dangerous terrain, if it wasn't this particular embark, I probably would consider doing an axe or a weapon. We'll be producing training axes almost instantly at embark, so there'll be some weapon available, just not a particularly good one. If this were evil terrain, it would be wholly inadequate, but since this is just a neutral terrain, we should have plenty of time to get a palisade up and get initial fortifications dug. I won't bring a training axe because we'll use logs to make the first training axe. Again, crossbow I can make out of logs. I have cats. Blocks I'll make out of stone once we start mining. Now, see, blocks for the well I'll actually make out of metal. We'll make gold blocks. We won't make stone blocks. And yeah, we'll talk about well and how to get water source underground safe, where it won't freeze, both for drinking and for fishing. We'll be using the Phoebus tile set. I don't normally bother with a diagnoser. There's no aquifer. I've disabled them for this embark, for this world gen. Keep them coming, guys. All good ideas. See if somebody can find something I've forgotten that I really need. I've used several. I just like Phoebus preferably to the others. That's just the way it is. I've tried Obsidian. I've tried Space Fox. I've tried Mayday. I've tried Iron Hand. I gotta go with what I love, man. Nothing, guys. I got 90, almost 90 embark points to spend, and nobody can think of something that we really need. Food you bring with you does not produce shells under any circumstances. So, for example, cave lobsters are automatically processed already. They don't have any shells with them. Unprepared raw cave lobsters can be processed, but these are processed lobsters. We have a couple of cats. I'm not going to bother with shells and bones. We'll make bones if we need them. Take a look, guys. See if you can catch something I may have forgotten. Now you can bring turtles if our particular embark doesn't have turtles, but if you bring turtles, what you got to realize is you're not actually bringing raw turtles. You're bringing processed turtles, basically turtle meat. Um, none of these foods are unprocessed in the sense of shells. There's no way to bring shells at embark unless you might be able to actually bring the shells themselves. Hang on. So no, you can't even bring the shells. You could bring amulets and earrings and already processed crafts, but you can't actually bring shells. Otherwise, that would be something I would bring with me because that would be one thing that's mutable that I can't take from Embark that I really wish I could. We do have flux, yes, marble. We have lots of iron and flux. We are going to be drowning in steel when we're ready for it. We won't start off doing steel. We will start off with bronze. I will demonstrate uh, making tools well before we're ready to start in on steel. Bags, we've got 20 bags at the moment. I can bring more. I'll just add more sand, but I think I'll go ahead and add the plaster somebody recommended just so I have some, but it's not strictly speaking necessary. Gypsum plaster is used for setting bones. Splints work as well. So we'll add some gypsum plaster here. I'm going to skip the pigtail cloth at the start because I think I can probably get the pigtails up and running quickly enough. If it turns out I need them more quickly, I could be in trouble, but I'm willing to take a chance on that. Silk, on the other hand, is really tough to get early on. Anything else you can think of, guys? Nah, I'm making my picks. Cages will make fairly early on. Wheelbarrow I'll make fairly early on, and man, they're expensive. Leather we'll get early on from our draft animals. Keep them coming, guys. All good ideas. These are all things that I've had to consider at some point that I'm not taking for a reason. So you mentioning them, I get to explain why I do or don't bring them. So that's perfect. All fantastic suggestions, but I think I have almost everything. I mean, there's a few things that you either can't take or that. I mean, I could bring iron, I guess, right off the bat if I really wanted to and swap out some of this ore, but I ended up with less overall. I have silk thread. Glass I could go ahead and bring. Even though we have sand, I could go ahead and bring a couple pieces of glass just to have some readily available in case we need it. So a couple pieces wouldn't hurt. And I have sand on site, and I've got silk if silk will work. Pipe sections. Yeah, well, maybe not bringing those expensive. Ropes I'll make almost immediately if we need them for whatever reason. I can immediately turn the silk thread into cloth, turn the cloth into rope, and immediately turn the rope into a traction bench, so no harm there. This is kind of I'm kind of looking at this as a how do I set up a generic embark. So this gives you 40 points to play with still. Let's bring some more dogs. We'll go through them. Okay, that gives me 9 points. Let's add some more sand. 4 points left. Okay, we'll back 2 points of sand off and we'll add one more thread there. That's 0. All right, I think that gets me everything I really care about. Do remember to check before you embark. Before you embark, check that you have an anvil for smithing if you plan to do any before the first caravan. That you have ore if you plan to make your own materials. That you have food if you plan to feed your dwarves to start and not have them start off immediately needing to harvest food. That you have drink if you don't immediately embark with plants and plan to immediately brew drinks. that you have seeds if you intend to plant crops that you didn't harvest yourself, that you have sand if you'd like to have early access to glass and bags, that you have thread so that you can make cloth items on demand, that you at least consider the sorts of rare objects. Okay, quickly through the dwarf setup. Yeah, I can do that. Okay, so here's the quick dwarf setup. I bring 4 miners. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, all of whom have proficient mining level 5 and novice first level discipline. I bring a carpenter, a mason, and a weaponsmith. And the weaponsmith doubles as a grower. All 7 have 1 level of discipline, so that I have the ability to bury targets quickly. Keep in mind, my initial setup is strictly limited on wealth production skills. I'm not looking to produce wealth initially. My goal initially is to get a fortress set up, prepared and secure. And that's my first and most highest priority initially. Okay, I think we've got everything. Let's see what we can do with a name here. Hmm. All right, now before I move on from this point, does anybody have any questions? Because once I get past the embark screen, I can't come back. Any questions at all? I named the group and the fort. Sometimes I'll hit random, sometimes I'll name it specifically. Just depends on what kind of mood I'm in. Nobody ever thinks the question's been asked, only when they're actually thinking about the thing they need to ask the question about. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everything with respect to embarks. I've kind of talked about what I bring, why I bring it, which skills I take for my dwarves, and why. Um, my starting 7 all have discipline. My starting 7 all have mutable skills. I have all of the necessary components to start a fort and sustain a fort early on in this collection of goods. Um, this general setup could be modified to be more appropriate for specific types. I could swap out a couple of miners and bring some soldiers if I needed to embark somewhere hostile. I could swap out resources and bring something different if I needed to specialize more towards an area where something was unavailable or less. Discipline is a new skill, and basically it's the stand your ground skill, for lack of a better word. Dwarves with no discipline, 0, will have a problem with dead bodies, for example. So your Undertaker, he's got to have some sort of discipline, because he'll run away from every dead body he sees otherwise. So, yeah. I have my starting 7 have discipline because chances of you having a migrant that actually has the skill aren't necessarily very good, and you'll need somebody who has the skill in order to be able to deal with certain things. Discipline keeps your dwarves from freaking out. As an example, in Fortresses in version 40, where I forgot the discipline skill, I've had goblin corpses that took forever and a day to clean up, not because they were busy grabbing socks, but because every time they got close enough to the corpse to pick it up, they freaked out and took off. It theoretically affects militia. I don't know that I've seen it too much in terms of military because I tend to get my military trained fairly quickly or I'm working with traps, but having your starting 7 have 1 level means that you are pretty much guaranteed to have somebody available somewhere who can bury corpses and deal with unpleasantness. And if you're planning to deal with dead things, you're going to need it. So that's one I've added. Typically in my older embarks, there was no discipline skill, so I would have had my points a little different than this. The grower weaponsmith would have had the full 5 levels in weaponsmith. The miners would have had nothing different, but I would have had the extra embark points to spend over here, so we would have had even more than we have this time. Yeah, I mean, there's ways to raise it, but the way we're probably going to go about it is I'm going to have specific people who are part-time militia who will build discipline when they're training idly, who have specific jobs to deal with certain unpleasant things. Um, it doesn't affect your butchers, as far as I know, or anything really invasive. It really does just deal with combat effects, basically, when you have to deal with the aftermath of something dying in combat. And Dining Hall Puppy Drop, that's right. Raise the discipline skill by sacrificing puppies to the cause. Kittens we have to butcher. They don't yield any meat, but they do yield a high rate of satisfaction. Okay, nobody's had any questions, so I'm going to go ahead and move on from here. Go ahead and embark. I didn't save that profile. Damn it.
Oh, welcome to our new home. Best make the best of it. Let's start digging.
Well, I'll have to go back and take it down manually and create it and put it out in the stream instead of exporting it. No! Okay, so I'll give you a quick brief overview of Dwarf Fortress in general. This is our embark, and I'm going to zoom out. Zoop. Right here is our wagon with our dwarves and animals around it. There are some ponds. These brown circles are all tree trunks. There's our stream moving through the area. Ponds on both sides, trees on both sides. These little light green dots are shrubs of various sorts that can be picked for berries. I can move up a Z level, up into the canopy of the trees, up into the sky, up above the trees, until that's as high as I can get. That's my 15 levels above the surface. And I can go down through the trees, through the trunks, into the ground. So here's just below ground level. And then below that is all Fog of War. And it's Fog of War all the way down. And it turns out that our world bottoms out at Z level 32. 106 levels below ground. Our surface is up at level 138, and the trees top out at 153. There you go. So there's the height of our world. Now, this is all real interesting, but let's talk about how all of this down here is really laid out for a second. Now, DF Hack has a tool, and I will acknowledge up front that this is technically a cheat, so be aware. The tool is called Reveal. This will hide the Fog of War on places you haven't seen, so although my dwarves can see everything above ground, Previously, they couldn't see all the sand in this area, only the sand near the ponds where they could see the edges. They couldn't see these other layers at all. But what you're looking at here are veins and clusters of gems, and here's caverns, and then below that some more different metals, and that's probably marble, and then more cave, complete with mushroom trees. You can actually kind of see them there towards the middle left here. These are mushroom trees as I go down through their caps. And as you go down through the world, you can kind of see how the world is laid out in terms of caves. In fact, looking at that upper area there, you see that black spot? It looks like this cave might very well connect all the way down to the bottom cave, so that once you hit one, you hit both. It looks like it goes all the way down to the bottom of the world there. So that, yeah, that's going to touch all the way to the bottom third cavern. So we'll discover the bottom two at the same time when we do. In the bottom middle right here, this right here is a magma pipe. As I go down further, you'll actually see the magma. So it opens up in this third cave, and then there's magma filling that tube. Now the black boxes you notice are boundaries that the standard reveal command draws around the spoiler metal, adamantine. And then here is the magma sea, and pillars, and then the semi-molten rock, and then below the semi-molten rock, the place that shall not be named, which is not revealed by the standard reveal command. You're spoiler safe here for the moment. Let's take a moment and talk about the geography underground, if you will. How is all this laid out? Well, it's actually not that complicated. Once you get into the soil layers are pretty much uniform. The brown spots you see here are just tree roots, and if you cut the trees down, they just basically revert back to the standard material. Below that, this is a standard soil level. You'll notice there's not really any variation. Sometimes you'll see gems in soil, but it's not really common. Again, soil. Then we hit our first stone layer. What you're looking at here is veins of metal, clusters, and you'll notice there's at least two different kinds of metal here. There's a green metal and there's a red metal. And since this is on reveal, I can actually determine what that is. So let's zoom in for a second here. We'll look at just one cluster. You'll notice there's a fairly regular pattern to these in terms of how widely they're spaced, and if you use a fairly loose pattern for your exploratory mining, you'll still probably hit pretty much all of the metal you care about, because you only need to hit one square of each vein in order to find it, and once you've found it, you'll find the whole thing. These clusters, these large gray hunks, are magnetite. So to give you an idea, this stream is going to have we're going to be buried in iron ore. There's coal here. This is iron ore of a different sort, I'm pretty sure. Let's take a look. Sure. That's hematite. So this is magnetite on top of hematite, all iron. Iron and coal. That's steel in one layer, basically, as soon as you get flux. Right under the soil, so we'll be digging through it right off the start. And it's enough iron to last for a millennium is right. Below this, now you'll notice that the material here, the stone, the reddish color, conglomerate, this probably had an aquifer on it, just so you know. Conglomerate is usually a source of aquifers, which means you could get around the aquifer in this map by digging down probably through the iron clusters, if you really wanted to do this with the aquifer intact. Here's a cluster of some gems. So these clusters of different types of gems here, more valuable, less valuable. These are aventurines and white jade. And as we go down, the type of stones are in layers. So below that's granite, and the granite is riddled with galena. And below that is diorite, and the diorite kind of dies off in terms of metals. You'll notice there's gems, but no metal veins, no clusters. As we go down a little further, then we hit schist. Again, just gems. I don't see any veins here. Further down, we're now looking at veins of tetrahedrite, marble, again just gems. Below that, schist, riddled with tetra, quartzite, and so on and so forth. Now most of these are just standard stones. They're not particularly special. Minerals were set to 500 in World Gen. In the settings. I did export World Gen, so I do have that. I won't have to go back and rebuild that, thankfully. Native gold here, so that's gold ore. And then on further down, more caves and so forth. And then basically this structure holds all the way down through it. Either it's a stone that doesn't have any clusters, or there are clusters of either stone or ores and veins of stone or ores. And the pattern, although it's entirely random, if you'll notice, there is a general overarching sort of spacing to the veins. A line drawn vertically right through here would intersect all of it. A line drawn vertically right through here would intersect all of it. A line drawn horizontally right through here would intersect all of it. You might miss a vein or two, but you're not going to miss much, and you don't need a particularly tight pattern unless you're just looking for the gems. And the same is true if you're looking for cavern features. You don't need a particularly tight exploratory pattern. A really loose one with long, narrow corridors is going to hit most of it. And frankly, we're never going to run out of iron. Holy cow. Lord. That's probably the most iron I've had on a map in a long time. Not to mention the fire clay and the yellow sand below ground, well below ground where they're safe. This is a fantastic map for a new player. This is at 500, and I usually play out about 500 in terms of the mineral setting. The Z level. Let's talk about Prospect again. First, let me unreveal the map. I don't really want to know where all that stuff is. I have a general idea just because I know the pattern of how veins and clusters are laid out, but I don't really want to know where every little thing underground is. I don't want to know in advance. The caverns are down there somewhere. We'll find them. Then we'll work around them, basically. Oh, the Z level that's bright yellow, that's not gold, that's sand. The red one was fire clay, and this gray layer right below is silty clay. Silty clay, fire clay, sand. I remember which levels those were because they were right at the top. Okay, so now we've taken a peek below ground. We've seen how stone is laid out in terms of the game. Prospect, which was an estimate before, now the game has loaded all the materials into memory, so now it knows what's here. In addition, it's also now aware of trees, which you now see here. This is how much wood is in all the trees. And I think it may be using the old estimates. I don't know if this is current. This used to be logs, and I don't know if it's been updated for the new drops a whole ton of wood logs that we have now. These shrubs are harvestable. Stuff that you can pick, basically. In particular, this will let you locate whether you have any rope reeds on your map. Rope reeds are great for a cloth industry later. And as you can see, we do have reed rope. There are 47 of them on the map here on this surface level somewhere, so we can pick those when we need to do cloth. These are much, much more accurate than before. And in fact, Reveal now tells us how much adamantine we have. This map has 2,528 raw adamantine. Now that's all of it, not just the safe stuff. But magnetite, 72,000 magnetite. A 5x5 here would be absolutely off the charts in terms of magnetite. It estimated something like 200,000 originally. The marble layer here has 200,000 marble, so plenty of flux. This is a really decent map for a new player. I don't know what more you could really want other than surface magma would be about the only thing I could possibly ask for. A hunter-gatherer based fortress is viable if you have a way to seal yourself up or defend yourself. You won't be able to just survive on the surface solely as hunter-gatherers. Eventually you're going to have to deal with sieges. Pacifist hippie dwarves die. I don't know if it's possible with just hunting and gathering. It might be if you dug out multiple soil layers and in order to allow more shrubs to grow. But I'm not sure how well you could survive just off cavern and surface crops. Maybe. Yes, I do have a YouTube channel. I will post the link. I forgot to stick it in the pre-embark information. Yep, this tells you what it is. This is what it is, how much of it there is, and which Z levels it's on. So if you wanted to pinpoint, for example, where your gold was, I could use this to zoom directly to the levels where the gold was, and then start mining directly for the gold. In this case, I really don't care. I just know that there's iron down there somewhere, and that there's flux down there somewhere, and I'll deal with whatever I find as I find it. Which, as it turns out, is an enormous amount of iron. Holy crap. The easiest way to defend your dwarves is definitely to just simply dig a hole, move everything in, and then seal it up. You do still have to figure out how you're going to get migrants into the fort, but nothing can destroy a bridge if it's raised, unless you do something silly. So, at that point, your fortress becomes safe as long as you can keep your dwarves fed. So, the first thing we're going to talk about is getting the resources below ground and getting our dwarves fed, and the steps that we'll need to take to get those things done. We're not actually going to start playing tonight, but I'll run you through the basics. First off, we're going to cut down some trees, probably in this area here. And I'll dig a staircase of some sort here in the middle that will go down. And we'll dig our first level out, not on this first soil layer. I want to leave that solid. We'll dig out below that, fire clay and the sand. And the reason we're doing that is not because it's fire clay and sand, although that's nice. We're doing that because I want one solid level in case stuff falls off the trees or logs fall. It doesn't punch holes in my roof. It just hits the surface. Whereas if I hollow this level out, then I have to deal with stuff punching holes in my roof, which is bad. And then we'll make some simple walls, and we'll have a nice drawbridge we can raise, and that'll be our initial little hobbit hole. Now, it'll develop into a fortress from there, but we'll have some safety right off the bat. That's not what we're going to do tonight, however. Tonight, we're dealing with pre-embark stuff, and that includes getting Dwarf Therapist set up. This is as far as we're going to go play-wise. Now, earlier, we launched Dwarf Therapist. We didn't really do anything with it. I just, sort of minimized it and closed it and put it away and didn't say anything and just, kind of shuffled it under the rug. But this is an incredibly crucial tool for me to manage my fortress. First, you need to recognize what this is. What Dwarf Therapist is basically a memory utility for Dwarf Fortress. It reads certain values out of the memory state, and it can write back to that memory state, allowing you to modify the game. Now, what it does by default is nothing that's cheating. It's just the same thing as going in through about 3,000 menus, in and out, up and down, back and forth, hitting enter to turn things off or turn them on, in and out, 20 dwarves, 19 more to go, 18 more to go, and that's if you're fast. And the problem is it's 200 keystrokes instead of 2 clicks. So, generally speaking, I leave the labor management in Dwarf Therapist and don't bother with the default vanilla interface. Truthfully, with that much iron, we probably won't have to we won't have to dig much of mine tunnels at all. We'll dig, 10 feet in each direction, hit iron, and dig out a cluster. And that'll be as much iron as we need to start, pretty much. It's kind of a shame we didn't get to deal with, copper and bronze, and then maybe iron way down as igneous extrusive, but that's okay, we can deal with this. Alright, so first off, we'll connect to Dwarf Fortress's memory, and it'll read our dwarves. So here's our starting 7, and this is the same information we could gather about them in the game. We're just seeing it in a spreadsheet format, all neatly presented. It tells me what job they're doing, how happy they are, whether they have all their equipment, what their profession is, which labors are set, Whether they'll do jobs of particular types is whether their labors are set. And what's that all mean? Okay, so let's back up. Remember when I started, I embarked with 4 miners? Well, here they are, all 5s. 5, 5, 5 in the mining column. That's because they're all 5 miners. Down here's our carpenter, here's our mason, here's our farmer / weaponsmith. Now, those are just kind of initial professions. Eventually I like to do custom professions, and generally speaking, I like to have custom professions for specific specialized jobs. I have seen the DF Hack Manipulator, I haven't messed with it, so unfortunately I can't really introduce folks to it really well. Basically, there's a Dwarf Therapist-like UI built into DF Hack. Alright, so let's talk about custom professions for a minute. First, let's set old Bombwreck here to have no custom profession. And I'll commit those changes. And now suddenly Bombwreck has no profession. If I look at the dwarf details here, he's Bombwreck Meadowbees. He's still listed as a miner because Dwarf Fortress is still paused, and I don't want to unpause it. But he has no profession as of now. He's been removed. You'll notice his labors are turned off. He's no longer doing the hauling labors. The reason for that is because that's the way I've set that particular custom profession up. So here are the custom professions I've built so far. My basic carpenter profession and my peasant profession. And my peasant profession is just hauling and miscellaneous stuff. So if you look through these skills, they're not mutable. Wood cutting, animal care, trapping, dissection, feeding, miscellaneous processing skills, processing skills, shearing, spinning, dyeing, glazing, pump operating, basically all the stuff that anybody can do. They won't necessarily do it quickly because low skill will impact their speed, but I can build 4 workshops and have 4 of them working side by side. But what I need to do is build out the rest of my custom professions. So we're going to go through the process I would go through to build out those custom professions on air. First, I'll set them off. Now, I need a miner profession, and my miners do mining and mechanics. And both of these are mutable skills, but generally speaking, the miners will be doing mining, and that'll be what they boot. If you want to specialize a mechanic, and we will for this fort on stream, leave mechanics off. Just do mining. Now, you notice he's still not doing any hauling. You only turn hauling on if you want somebody to be moving items into stockpiles. I want my miners mining. If they're not mining, I'll find something else for them to do, but I don't want them necessarily going off to haul stuff. I want them busy cutting rooms out of the rock. I don't use rolls, so I won't touch on those too much, Purple. Basically, rolls allow you to determine how fit for a given thing a dwarf is. So, for example, my dwarves, you'll notice, all have their skills set really high on the things that they do. Well, there's a reason. Basically, the more you train a dwarf at a skill, the better he gets at it, and he develops all those attributes necessary to support that, so he gets even better at it from that angle, too. So, in the end, what really matters is how you train your dwarf, not what he starts as. Roles, if you're really wanting to customize your dwarves to where they're fitted, allow you to say, oh, look, Lorbam is a new arrival in my fortress, and hey, look, he's a really skilled miner, qualified as a miner, so he's really good at this, he's really well suited. We could turn that on and make him a miner so that you know what he's good at, and he's better at it to start. But the truth is that by the time you get to a dwarf who hits a high level of skill, they're going to have developed all those attributes along the way just through routine training and practice. The military tab allows me to see dwarven physical attributes useful for the combat. Student, teacher, these are roles just like the other things. This guy is not particularly strong, this one is stronger than all the other dwarves. whether they have a weapon and a shield. These are my miners. They came with I'm not sure why they have one. I will have to consult the manual. That's not one I remember. Oh, it's missing. Sorry, that's why. Because he's a miner and he doesn't have a pick. Ha! That makes much more sense. Guess if I pointed at it, it would have made a lot more sense faster. Awesome. Whether they're wearing any armor, whether they're carrying supplies like food and drink. Quivers and ammo if they're crossbow dwarves. So this will tell you whether they're equipped. It'll also tell you whether they have any military skills of particular types, if your guys are good with axes or hammers or maces, whether they're good at fighting or wrestling, whether they can use a shield or dodge, whether they can swim, and so on. Social skills are those skills that dwarves build in conversations with one another. Some of them are good for having for your diplomat/broker. Some of them are great to have for your manager who might get yelled at by somebody, and so on. Teacher and student have a role in teaching military skills from skilled dwarves to lesser skilled dwarves. Record keeper is used for keeping track of how much your stuff you have in your fortress. Organizer is used for approving work orders for the manager. Appraiser is used by your broker to determine the value of goods. Okay. So that covers the basics of labors in general. Most of Custom Professions is on this screen. So let's go through this. We clear this guy out. We add mining. We set new custom profession from this unit. And we name it and set it up. We clear him back out, and we repeat the process. Now basically, all I'm doing here is setting up a new custom profession for each particularly skilled skill that I want someone to be doing. So masonry, for example, I want him doing masonry. You'll notice he's still not doing any hauling. If I need him to do hauling, I'll turn it on. But generally, I want my craftsmen doing crafts, and I want my haulers doing hauling, and I don't want the two crossing over. So now we've got him set to masonry. We'll do that next. Now there's actually several moodable skills in that set. Wood crafting, bone carving, leatherworking, tanning, all moodable. But the truth of the matter is, if you're going to be doing those skills, none of those are particularly valuable to me, and I don't really care if you mood them. So this is going to be a hunter class, basically. So it's got hunting, it's got the skills necessary to build all the stuff it needs for itself. It can craft its own bone crossbows and bone bolts, it can craft its own wood crossbows and wood bolts, it can make quivers out of leather, and it can process its own kills. This is everything a hunter needs, right off the top. However, we do need to make sure that this guy can do refuse hauling and food hauling, because those items, at least refuse hauling, excuse me, because refuse is what corpses are, basically. I think everything else is good. Now, my hunters often will be doing my lever flipping if they're inside the fortress, because they'll be idle otherwise. We may have more than one of those once we're done, but that gives us a profession for the hunter. Forgot to add brewing to that guy. Once again, I'm doubling up on professions, and remember, they can only move one. But the net result is that if I've got people working in a forge, I just want to make sure it gets done in this case. So, although I have a skilled weaponsmith, for example, if I start ending up with people who have higher skills in one thing, what I'll just do is I'll leave them in the smith profession, and I'll just go back and disable the labors to make sure that the specialists are working within their specialty where possible. But initially, I'm more concerned with making sure that somebody's doing the smithing somewhere. Glass can be cut and set. Pots can be glazed. These things kind of go together, which is pretty much the only reason why I'm doing it this way. Pottery is, I believe, a mutable skill. Glassmaking, I know is. I'm fairly certain gem cutting is as well. None of those are particularly valuable. Glassmaking would be the best of the bunch, simply because glass is so versatile. But, frankly, if somebody's got to move gem cutting, and I want the glass makers to be a self-sufficient industry so that I don't have to mess with them by and large. So I'll make 3 or 4 of them and then call it a day, and they'll double up on clay when we do clay, and that'll take care of itself. These professions are not completely optimized. If I wanted to have the absolute, bestest guy doing the bestest thing, I'd have to take all of these multi-mutable skill professions and split them out further. So just a weaponsmith, just an armorer, just a blacksmith. Give me a sec, guys. I'm going to step AFK for a moment. Alright, let's see there. That gets us up to that point. Now, for cloth, weaving and clothes making are both mutable skills, as I recall. But generally speaking, I'll just go all out and have them do everything related to cloth, and they become a self-sufficient industry. They might become a weaving mood versus a clothes making mood, which frankly doesn't matter. A clothing item is only going to be worn by one dwarf, and a woven item is, again, it's just one item. And which one they mood in is not particularly important, because these guys are going to be doing jobs on repeat basically for the rest of their lives. Strand extraction is something that's only going to be rare in endgame, and if nobody else has the skill, I have to have somebody that does it, so I might as well throw it in with the rest of the cloth. And we'll call this the cloth making profession. Mechanics is a mutable skill. Well, the premise for Dwarf Fortress's world, guys, is that the elves actually grow the wooden objects. So they don't carve wood into a chest, they grow a chest. Alright, let's see, what else do we have here? We Make sure that the hauler class are set the way I like it, because I set them the other night. I'll make sure they where they want to be. Let's see. And I forgot plant gathering, which I need to go get. Okay, and there's plant gathering. Well, theoretically, they grow it and they bud it off. I mean, you know, it's not like anybody's ever demonstrated it on video for me, but I'm assuming that's the gist, because that's the reason that they're... At one point, Toady was talking about differentiating them, so you would be able to tell the difference between a grown wood object and a cut wood object. And then the elves would tolerate trade in one, but not the other, to make it clear what the distinction was. I don't know if he's still doing that or not. I'm a guy, I don't have to imagine chest weeds. Alright, so I think that that's gotten all my professions set now. There are other sometimes professions that I'll tinker with, for example, Executive Duke, if I have a Duke, or Executive Baron, if I have a Baron. That way I can keep track of those folks. And I'll touch on military professions actually on stream, because I'll use those alongside setting folks into the military to set as part of the whole military lesson. So this is the basics of doing custom professions. Basically, that lets me set labors just by clicking a dwarf or group of dwarves and saying, oh, well, I want all these guys to be masons now. Well, bang, now they've dropped all their other labors and they're all masons. Poof, done. Quit. Done. So this is really, really useful if I need to reassign labor because of a disaster or to deal with some emergency need, or simply to make sure that a particular job is prioritized. All things that would, really be problematic with the default interface. 2 clicks, done. And I can just drag select over the boxes, for example. Oh, made a mistake, clear. Now, you do need to be aware, there are some things you can do with Dwarf Therapist, not on by default, but you can highlight dwarves who are vampires, for example, or werebeasts, so that they have an identifier here where you can see it immediately if you want to deal with it. Allow labor setting on anyone lets you set labor on kids and nobles that you wouldn't normally be able to turn on. It marks what's really a cheat, show wound details, whether they've been diagnosed or not. These are things that you wouldn't be able to get in the game. Everything else is completely vanilla. The interface is a little different, but generally speaking, it's exactly what it seems to be. Color your nobles a different color. Set happiness a different color. All these things can be changed the way you like them, customized how you like, sizes, and so forth. All customizable. Very nice. Alright guys, here's the deal. I've run through custom professions. I've done Embark, and now I'm going to have to go get the Embark profile and rebuild it manually so that I can, actually export it. And then I've got my world gen. So I'm going to export custom professions, and you import them kind of the same way. You just hit import instead of export. And I'll export them for myself. And there's our professions. Now that's really the basics of what I wanted to cover in terms of pre-play sorts of things that I would consider. Custom professions are something you can build as you go along. You don't have to mess with those. You can go back and tinker with these views between times. For example, this one will display all my animals I brought with me. You can learn how to filter and group, and we'll talk about those on stream. This tool, you're going to see a lot of this as I play. That's really all I wanted to cover for this evening. So, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., we're going to resume, and I'm going to play. Before I go for the evening, does anybody have any questions? The rotated text actually isn't bad once you get familiar with it, and I can't remember, there may be an option to switch it the other way. So here's the deal. I have 7 dwarves. Purplepotamus is number 1. I have a farmer weaponsmith, and I have a miner. No, you don't understand. You don't get to pick whether it's a guy or a gal. I just go ahead and assign you that. You just whatever skill you got. So, who remembers which skills I put on my 7? Because if you remember which skills I put on my 7, I'll put you in. The weaponsmith already got taken. Farmer is the weaponsmith, guys. Taken. Don't have a hunter. Don't have a woodcutter. Who was watching? Don't have a hauler. Discipline's not a class. Nice try. Yes, but remember, I was setting up the custom professions. I didn't leave them on their custom professions. I put them back to what they were. What skills did I take at the beginning? Didn't know there was going to be a test, did you? Who wants to be what, guys? Everybody's got discipline. What other skills did I take? Okay, DJ, Brillo pad it is. Actually, the festivities start tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.